The morning my father was buried, the fog rolled in, so thick you couldn't see the water from the shore. But I could hear it, that slow, patient sound the Pacific makes when it's waiting for you to remember something. My name is Ellen Hollings. Ellie to the two people in this world who still call me that. And when the lawyer read my father's will, my older brother laughed. My older sister actually laughed harder, because Walter Hollings, the seafood king of Astoria, Oregon, left them $10 million in real estate, $3 million in family jewels, controlling shares of a company he built with his own two hands. And he left me $5,000 and a rotting old fishing boat that hadn't started in 20 years. They called me a fool for keeping it. My sister offered to write me a check right there at the funeral, just to save me the shame. I said no. I smiled, and I drove 2 hours west, alone, to a boat named the Saltwater Legacy. Peeling paint, rust bleeding down her sides, a floor of the engine room that hadn't been lifted since 1983. I thought I was going to say goodbye to my father. I had no idea he'd been waiting for me down there for 40 years, with a secret worth more than everything my brother and sister fought over combined. Stay with me, this one's true, and it starts with a rusted key. Let me take you back. 3 days before the will was read. St. Mary's by the Sea, a little white church on a hill in Astoria, Oregon. The kind of church that's been standing since 1897 with a bell that still rings for weddings and funerals and nothing much in between. The rain was coming sideways off the Columbia River that morning. Not a downpour. Just that steady coastal mist that gets inside your coat, inside your bones, inside your grief. I stood by the graveside in a black dress I'd owned for 11 years. The same dress I wore when I buried my husband Daniel. In 2023, on a Tuesday, on the shoulder of Interstate 5, a state trooper had knocked on my door at 4 in the morning. And I remember thinking, even before he spoke, that this dress was going to see more of my life than I ever wanted it to. And now here I was, wearing it again, for my father. My brother Preston arrived 30 minutes late. He came in a black Escalade, Bluetooth in his ear. He was still on a call with Hong Kong when he stepped out onto the wet grass in his handmade Italian shoes. Preston is 46 years old. He runs a hedge fund out of Manhattan. He hadn't been to Astoria in 15 years. Not for Christmas. Not for our stepmother's funeral. Not for Dad's 70th birthday. But here he was. For the reading. Not for the burial. He nodded at me. That was it. A nod. Like we were strangers at a business conference. My sister Vivian arrived in a Mercedes convertible. 42 years old. Boston real estate. Married up. Married Whitfield Ashford, whose family had owned half of Beacon Hill since the Coolidge administration. She wore black Chanel, sunglasses she didn't take off, and she spent most of the service on her phone, texting. I watched her thumb move across the screen, while the pastor talked about my father's love of the sea. I didn't cry at first. Couldn't. It's hard to cry when you're the only one who's actually there. Preston and Vivian were his children, from his first marriage, to a woman named Catherine, who left him when they were small. And my mother, Marigold, but everyone called her Goldie, was his second wife. 20 years younger. A schoolteacher from Warrenton, who used to bring cookies down to the docks for the fishermen's kids. She married Walter Hollings when she was 26. He was 46, and they had me, just me. One daughter, late in life, a quiet, red-haired girl who liked maps and rocks and the sound of foghorns. My mother died when I was 16. Ovarian cancer. Fast. Cruel. 6 months from diagnosis to that final morning. And after she died, it was just me and Dad. In that big drafty house on Franklin Avenue. He didn't know how to raise a teenage girl. He didn't know how to cook. He didn't know how to braid hair, or talk about boys, or explain why my chest hurt when I looked at her old sweaters hanging in the hall closet. But he took me out on the water. Almost every Saturday. Just the two of us. On the Saltwater Legacy. That was where he could talk. That was where he could be a father. And when I got older and moved to Portland to teach geography 9th and 10th grade, at a middle-of-the-road public school in the southeast neighborhoods, the Saturdays got farther apart. And then Daniel died. And I stopped coming out, because the ocean reminded me of everything I'd lost. And I couldn't add my father to the list yet. He kept calling. Every Sunday. 5 o'clock. I let it go to voicemail sometimes. I regret that now. God, do I regret that now? The pastor was a young man, new to the parish. He kept calling my father Mr. Hollings instead of Walter. Dad would have hated that. Walter Hollings didn't wear a suit, unless he had to. He shook hands like he was measuring a fish. And he laughed exactly 3 times a year. But when he did, it was the sound of a foghorn breaking through weather. I stepped forward when it was my turn. I pulled a small object out of my coat pocket. A scallop shell, cracked along one edge, pearl pink on the inside, worn smooth on the outside. I laid it on top of the casket. I heard Vivian sigh behind me, loud enough for it to be a comment. I didn't turn around. That shell was from a trip Dad and I took when I was 7 years old. He anchored in a little cove north of Cannon Beach. We got out and waded in tide pools all afternoon. He held my hand the whole time. He told me the names of every creature, the anemones, the hermit crabs, the barnacles that looked like tiny volcanoes. He said the shell was mine, to keep, because I'd found it. And you keep what you find, Ellie. That's the rule of the sea. I whispered it to him, under my breath, so low no one could hear. Kept it, Daddy. I kept it all these years. That was when I cried. Not loud, not for show. Just a slow, quiet leak. The way rain runs down a window. Preston stood behind me at the wake. The wake was held at the house. Franklin Avenue. 3rd floor of an old Victorian. That Dad refused to sell no matter how much the property was worth. The paint was peeling on the porch. There was still a rocking chair in the front bay window, with my mother's Afghan draped over the arm. He never moved it. Preston walked up to me with a plastic cup of coffee. Bad coffee. Someone had brought it in a cardboard carton from a gas station down the road. You holding up? He said. I am. Long day. It is. He looked around the house like he'd never seen it before, which honestly he almost hadn't. Not since he was a teenager. I forgot how small it was, he said. I didn't answer. Look, Ellie. He lowered his voice. The lawyer wants us all in his office tomorrow morning.
10 o'clock.
Portland. You need a ride? I have a car. Right? He tapped his cup. The Corolla, right? Vivian glided over. Champagne in her hand. Champagne. At a funeral. She'd found it somewhere. God knows where. Ellie. Sweetheart. We should really talk about the house. She waved her glass in a slow circle. The market's insane right now. Beach adjacent. Historic district. We could clear 750 if we list before summer. Dad's not even in the ground 12 hours, Vivian. He is, actually. As of 40 minutes ago. Let's be efficient. Preston smirked into his coffee. I looked at both of them. My brother in his $3,000 suit. My sister with her Botox smooth forehead. And her champagne. And I realized something that made my chest go very still. They weren't sad. Not even a little. They were relieved. I slept in my old bedroom that night. It hadn't changed. Same twin bed. Same yellow curtains. Same shelf of geography textbooks and National Geographic magazines stacked in date order, because that's how I've always been. Couldn't sleep. Of course I couldn't sleep. I got up at 2 in the morning, and I walked barefoot down the hall to Dad's bedroom. The door was open. His bed was made. He'd made his bed the morning he died. Because that was Walter Hollings. You make your bed. Every day. Even the day you don't get to come back to it. On his nightstand was a framed picture. My mother, 1986, laughing on the deck of the boat, wind in her red hair. Next to it was a picture of me, age 6, missing a front tooth, holding up a starfish. That was it. 2 pictures. Not Preston. Not Vivian. Just us. I sat on the edge of his bed, and I whispered his name, into the dark, and I waited to feel something. Anything. A sign. A stir. The old floorboards creaking. Something. Nothing came. Just the fog against the window, and the ocean for blocks away doing what it does. Waiting. The lawyer's office was in Portland, in one of those old stone buildings downtown with brass elevators and mahogany walls, and the smell of tobacco even, though no one had smoked inside in 30 years. Judge Edmund Whitaker, 72 years old. He wasn't a judge anymore. He'd retired from the bench a decade ago, but everyone still called him Judge. He'd been Dad's lawyer for 40 years. He'd known my mother. He'd stood as my godfather at my baptism at St. Mary's by the Sea when I was 3 months old. His office smelled like old paper and cedar. Preston sat on the leather couch, legs crossed, checking his Patek Philippe every 90 seconds. Vivian sat next to him, manicured hands folded, handbag in her lap that cost more than my monthly rent. I sat in the wingback chair by the window, wearing a cardigan my mother had knit for me the year before she died. Cream-colored, a hole in the left cuff where I'd caught it on a nail once. Judge Whitaker put on his half-moon glasses. He opened a leather folder. He looked at each of us, slowly, like he was memorizing our faces. Then he said, "Your father knew exactly what he was doing. I want you all to remember that, before we begin, and after we finish." Preston shifted. "Judge, no offense, I've got a call at 11. You'll miss it." The room got quiet. Judge Whitaker began. "To my son Preston Ellen Hollings," he read, "I leave the controlling shares of Hollings Seafood, Incorporated. In addition, the commercial real estate portfolio in the Pearl District, Portland, comprising 4 warehouse properties currently valued in aggregate at approximately $8.2 million. Preston's shoulders dropped an inch. Relief. I saw it. Pure animal relief. He was in the black. He was set. "To my daughter Vivian Catherine Hollings Ashford," the judge continued, "I leave the entirety of the Hollings family jewelry collection, currently held in safe deposit box 447 at First National Bank of Portland. This includes your grandmother Adelaide's sapphire and diamond set, the pearl chokers from the 1920s, and the emerald cabochon ring last appraised at $840,000. In addition, the liquid balance of my personal checking and savings accounts totaling approximately $512,000. Vivian exhaled through her nose. She smiled a tiny cat smile. I did the math in my head without meaning to. Almost $3 million, just for her. Not counting the jewelry appreciation. Judge Whitaker turned a page. He paused. He looked up. Right at me, over the tops of his glasses. And his eyes were so gentle I almost couldn't stand it. "To my daughter Ellen Marigold Hollings," he read. I held my breath. "I leave the sum of $5,000. Preston made a small sound. Half laugh, half cough. "And the fishing vessel currently registered as the Saltwater Legacy. Slip 14, Pier 9, Port of Astoria, Oregon." Vivian actually clapped her hand over her mouth. But she was smiling. She was smiling behind her hand. I sat very still. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I just held that scallop shell in my mind, and I waited for the room to stop tilting. "Oh, honey." Vivian dropped her hand. "Oh, sweetheart. I am so sorry." "Don't." "No. Listen. Listen. This isn't right. This is not right. Dad wasn't in his right mind those last few months. We can contest this. Don't. Ellie, that boat is a liability. A liability. The slip fees alone will bankrupt you in 6 months. The hull is probably—" "Vivian." She stopped. I turned my head to look at her. Slowly. "He remembered I love the ocean," I said. She blinked. "He remembered," I said again, and I felt the tears come. But they weren't sad tears. They were something else. Something I don't have a word for. Because he had reached out from the other side of the door. And he had given me the one thing in his whole life he had truly, purely loved. The boat. Not the money. Not the company. Not the house. The boat. The place where he was my father. I closed my eyes, and I whispered, "Thank you, Daddy." Preston made another sound. This one wasn't a cough. "Are you kidding me right now?" I opened my eyes. "Are you actually kidding me? Ellie, come on. He gave you a boat." "That thing is scrap. It's actually less than scrap. Because you're going to owe money on it before you own money on it. He was punishing you. He was punishing all three of us in different ways, and yours is the worst, and you're sitting here thanking a dead man for a floating coffin." "Preston."
No.
"I'm sorry. No, this is embarrassing." Vivian nodded slowly. Diplomatic, sisterly, predatory. "There's an easy fix," she said. Judge Whittaker cleared his throat. He had not stopped reading. He raised his voice a half step. Because he'd known this was coming. He'd probably known for years. "There is a stipulation." He read it aloud. "Should Ellen decline the vessel, the estate will compensate her with a lump sum of $200,000 to be paid equally from the personal assets of Preston Ellen Hollings and Vivian Catherine Hollings Ashford. $100,000 each. This transaction, if executed, transfers all rights, title, and interest in the saltwater legacy and any associated holdings to be dispensed at the joint discretion of the aforementioned parties." Preston opened his mouth to object. He closed it. He was calculating. I could see the numbers move behind his eyes. 100 grand out of his pocket. Peanuts. To be rid of the boat. And to shut the door on any question of a contest. Cheap. Insultingly cheap. Vivian was already opening her handbag. "I have my checkbook," she said. "Right here." "Vivian. This isn't." "Sweetheart, take the money. Take the money. What are you going to do with a boat? You're a schoolteacher. On a schoolteacher salary. In a one-bedroom apartment. Take the $200,000. Pay off your car. Go to Europe. Do something for yourself for once." The pen was already in her hand. Preston pulled out his phone. He was calculating aloud now under his breath. 105 with fees, wire transfer. We can have this closed by end of business."
No.
The word came out of my mouth. So quietly I wasn't sure I'd said it. Preston looked up. "What?"
No.
"Ellie." I said no. Vivian's pen stopped moving. "I'm keeping the boat," I said. Preston laughed. A real laugh. Like I'd told him a joke. "You are out of your mind. I'm keeping the boat." "Ellie, you cannot afford." "I'm keeping the boat." I didn't raise my voice. I've never been the kind of woman who raises her voice. My mother taught me that. She said soft is louder than loud, if you know how to use it. The room went silent. Judge Whittaker looked at me over his glasses. And I swear to you, I saw the corner of his mouth move. Not a smile, just a movement, like a man who had been waiting a long time to see something he'd been promised. He nodded once, slow, and he made a small mark on his page. Then he reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket, and he pulled out an envelope, cream-colored, sealed with red wax, a capital H pressed into the wax. He held it out to me. "Your father asked me to give this to you," he said. "But only if you kept the boat. Only if you didn't bargain for it. Only if you didn't hesitate." Preston stared at the envelope. His face was changing color. Not much, just a shade. "What is that?" he said. "It's for Ellen." "What is that?" "Preston, it's for Ellen." Vivian's pen was frozen mid-air. I took the envelope. My hand was shaking a little. The wax was rough against my thumb. I didn't open it. Not there. Not in front of them. I stood up. I smoothed my mother's cardigan. I put the envelope in my purse. I walked out of that office. Slowly, chin up. My mother's daughter. I heard Vivian hiss something at Preston, through the closed door, as I waited for the elevator. I heard him snap something back. I didn't listen to the words. I didn't care about the words. The elevator dinged. I stepped in. The brass doors closed on their faces. And I rode down 12 floors alone, holding my father's last letter against my chest like it was a small, warm, living thing. I opened it in my car, in the parking garage, 3rd level, under a flickering fluorescent light. The paper was thick, cream, my father's handwriting, slanted, careful, the handwriting of a man who had learned cursive from nuns in the 1950s and never lost it. There were only 3 sentences. My good girl, go down to the place the sea cannot touch. The combination is your birthday, written backwards. That was it. I read it 4 times. I turned the paper over. Nothing on the back. I sat in that parking garage for a long time. Engine off. Rain drumming somewhere overhead. And I did not understand what he was telling me. Not yet. Not for another 3 weeks. But I understood one thing. He had left me something. Something more than the boat. Something he did not want Preston or Vivian to know about. And whatever it was mine. I drove west. 2 hours. Through the coast range. Rain in bands. Sun breaking through in the last 30 miles. Astoria came up on me the way it always does. Around a bend. The great gray sweep of the Columbia River meeting the Pacific. The old Victorian houses stepping down the hillside like they were about to slide into the water and had been about to for 100 years. I drove straight to the port. Pier 9. Slip 14. I hadn't been down there in over a year. Not since Dad's last birthday. When I'd come out for a weekend, and we'd sat on the deck of the boat in silence, drinking coffee, watching a bald eagle work the pilings. I parked at the end of the lot. I walked out onto the wooden planks. The gulls screamed overhead, invisible in the fog. The dock creaked. The smell, you never forget it. Diesel, kelp, old fish, salt. That's Astoria in one breath. At the very end of the pier, at the very last slip, sat the saltwater legacy. Vivian had been right about one thing. She looked terrible. The paint was gone in patches. Rust bled down the hull in long orange tears. The blue and white was almost more brown now. The wooden deck was slick and green with algae. The rigging clanked in the wind like something asking to be put out of its misery. She was 42 feet of tired. I stood on the dock, and I put my hand on the cold steel, and I said very softly, "Hi, girl. It's me. I'm here." She creaked. That was all. Just a creak. But it was enough. "You must be Ellie." I turned around. An old man was walking up the dock. Tall. Broad through the shoulders even at his age. White beard down to the middle of his chest.
Bull capítulo.
A wool sweater the color of the sea. And blue eyes that had the crinkled kindness of a man who had spent 70 years squinting at horizons. "I am Elias Thorvald, but your daddy called me Cap. Everyone does." He held out his hand. It was the biggest hand I'd ever shaken. Rough as a rope. "I've heard about you," I said. "He talked about you every Sunday. Right there." He pointed to the boat. "Sat on that deck. Coffee in one hand. Told me every A you got on every report card back to 3rd grade." I laughed. A wet, surprised laugh. He did not. He did. Cap's beard moved. He was smiling. He said you had your mother's eyes, but his stubborn streak. He said when you set your mind to something you were a mule. That sounds like Dad. It does. We stood there for a second. Cap looked at the boat. Then at me. Then back at the boat. His face got quieter. "Ellie, girl, I gotta tell you something, and I hate to say it." "Okay." "She's in trouble." I nodded slow. "The port authority's been on my back for 6 months. She's taking on water. Slow leak. Somewhere in the aft bilge. I've been running an external pump off the shore power to keep her from settling, and I've been fudging the paperwork because it was your daddy. But he's gone now, and I can't fudge anymore. How long do I have?" 30 days. To do what? To haul her out and repair her, or to authorize her for scrap and let them tow her to the yard in Ilwaco. I looked at the boat again. The green algae. The rust tears. I thought about my checking account. $3,700 in it, roughly. 6 months of savings. My teacher's salary. The mortgage on the little bungalow in Portland that Daniel and I had bought together, and that I was still paying off alone. 30 days. 30 days to save something that had been dying for 20 years. I felt something rise up in my chest. Not panic. Something older than panic. Cap, I said. Give me the month. He looked at me for a long time. Then he nodded. Once. You're his girl, all right? He walked me to a place called the Weathered Anchor. A coffee shop, right at the foot of the pier. White paint. A hand-painted sign. A hanging basket of geraniums that were still trying in November in the rain. Inside it smelled like cinnamon and butter and coffee and old wood. Behind the counter was a small round woman in a green apron, with her silver-white hair pinned up in a bun. She was scrubbing a mug with a dish towel. She looked up when we walked in. She saw me. She stopped scrubbing. She put the mug down. She put the towel down. She came around the counter. Slow. Steady. Her eyes never left my face. She stopped 3 feet away. She said, "Oh my God, you look just like her." I opened my mouth to ask. She was already crying. "I'm Winnie," she said. "Winifred Halloran. Your mother Goldie, was my best friend. From the time we were 6 years old. We grew up 2 blocks apart on Grand Avenue. And I have been waiting 19 years for you to walk through that door." I didn't know what to do. I have not been hugged, really hugged, since Daniel died. Miss Winnie Halloran hugged me. She smelled like butter and coffee and rain. She was small and warm and solid. She patted my back the way my mother used to. 3 little pats. Then a squeeze. Then 3 little pats. I broke right there, in her flour-dusted apron. In the front room of a coffee shop I had never been in before. In front of a fisherman I had known for 11 minutes. I sobbed. Real sobs. The kind you can't do in the pew at a funeral because Preston is watching. She just held me, and she said very softly into my hair, "Your daddy came in here every single week for 3 years, honey. He'd order a black coffee and a cornbread muffin, and he'd sit at that table right there by the window, and he'd tell me about you. Every week. He was so proud of you, sweetheart. He was so proud." Winnie sat me down at that same window table. She poured me a cup of coffee I didn't ask for. She slid a warm cornbread muffin across the table. "On the house," she said. "Forever. As long as I'm alive. Every time you walk in that door. Miss Winnie, you don't have to. Honey, please, let me." I let her, and she sat across from me, and she told me things about my mother I had never heard. About the summer they were 14 and stole a canoe. About the time Goldie caught her boyfriend cheating and slashed his tires with a fish knife. About how proud she was at the end that I had gone to college. That I taught. That I was, in her words, doing something that mattered. Winnie's voice got very soft. She said something to me, right before, in the hospital, about a week before she went. What did she say? She said, "Winnie, promise me, don't let Ellie get lost. She's the one with his heart. She looks like me, but she's got his heart, and those first 2, they got Catherine's. They got their mother's spine, and they don't have his heart. Promise me you won't let her get lost." I stared at Winnie across the table. The muffin steamed between us. She said that? She said that. I closed my eyes. Winnie reached across the table and put her hand on mine. "Whatever your daddy left for you on that boat," she said. "You take your time with it. You hear me? Your time. Nobody else's." I looked up. "You know what he left." "I know he left something. I know he was working on something in that engine room for years. He wouldn't tell me what. He said it was for you and it wasn't for me to know." The envelope in my purse felt like it was made of lead. I nodded slowly. I said, "I think I need to sleep on the boat tonight." Winnie nodded, like she'd been expecting me to say it. I figured, take the extra blankets from the back closet. And the flashlight from the pantry. The batteries are new. She squeezed my hand. Then she let me go. That night on the Saltwater Legacy, in the little cabin under the wheelhouse, I lit a small candle. I found my mother's Bible in the drawer beside the bunk. Dad had kept it. Of course he had. He had kept everything of hers. I opened it to Psalm 107, because that was hers. The one about those who go down to the sea in ships. The one she read every night the boat was out, and Dad was late coming back. They that go down to the sea in ships that do business in great waters. These see the works of the Lord, and his wonders in the deep. I read it aloud. Just to me. Just to the fog against the porthole. I prayed. I prayed for my father. I prayed for Daniel. I prayed for my mother. I prayed for the boat. I prayed for the fear that was sitting on my chest like a wet blanket. And then, near midnight, my phone rang. I picked it up. I knew who it was before I looked. Ellie. Preston's voice was different. Tighter. Meaner. It's late, Preston. I know what you're doing. I'm not doing anything. I'm on the boat. You're on the boat, because Dad left you something. And it wasn't the boat. Was it? I didn't answer. Ellie. I hired someone this afternoon. Private investigator. Out of Portland. He's going to be watching that dock every single day, until you tell me what's on that boat. Do you understand me? Preston. Because if you find something and you don't declare it, that's fraud. That is a state fraud. And I will drag you into court so fast your head will spin. I don't care if you're my sister. I don't care if you're a widow. I don't care if you cry in your little cardigan. I will end you. I sat very still. I looked at the candle. The flame was steady. I said quietly, "Good night, Preston." I hung up. I turned off the phone. I sat in the dark for a long time, and then I put on my father's old overalls. They were 3 sizes too big, folded up at the ankles and cuffs, and I picked up the flashlight and I opened the hatch to the engine room. The smell hit me first. Diesel. Rust. Standing water. 50 years of grease. I climbed down the ladder. The beam of the flashlight cut through the dark like a knife. I did not know it yet, but 8 inches beneath the soles of my boots. Just 8 inches. My father had been waiting for me for 40 years. And in the morning, or the morning after that, or the morning after that, I was going to find him. 3 weeks. That's what I had. 21 days between me and a tow to the scrapyard in Ilwaco. 21 days between me and losing the last thing my father ever loved. And I had a full-time job. I taught geography, 9th and 10th grade, Roosevelt Middle School, Southeast Portland. 2 hours from Astoria, each way. So I lived 2 lives that November. 6 a.m. Alarm, shower, coffee, cardigan, drive to school in the dark, teach 5 periods about tectonic plates and river deltas and monsoon patterns, lunch at my desk, grade papers during my prep period. Bell rings at 3:15. Sprint to the parking lot. Get in the Corolla. Drive west on Highway 26. Through the Coast Range. 2 hours. Sometimes 3 when the rain came in bands. Arrive at the pier at 6. Change in the boat's little head into Dad's overalls. Descend into the engine room. Work until midnight. Or 1. Or 2. Sleep 4 hours in the bunk. Wake up before dawn. Drive back east. Repeat. My hands. God, my hands. By the end of the first week, they didn't look like mine anymore. Blisters on top of blisters. A cut across my right palm that wouldn't close because I kept opening it on rusted bolts. Grease under my nails that no amount of scrubbing would get out. I had to wear gloves in the classroom because a parent complained at the PTA meeting that my hands were dirty and it was setting a bad example for the girls. The girls didn't care. The girls thought I was cool. A 9th grader named Amaya raised her hand on the 3rd day. "Miss Hollings, are you okay? You look tired."
I'm okay, sweetheart.
"You sure?" "I'm sure. Thank you for asking." She looked at me for a long moment. She was 13 years old, and she had already figured out that grown women lie about being okay. She didn't push, but she brought me a granola bar the next morning. Just set it on my desk. Didn't say a word. I ate it in my car at lunch and I cried a little. Miss Winnie showed up on the boat every single night at 6:30. Every single night. She brought a covered dish in a canvas tote bag. Clam chowder one night. Salmon cakes with a lemon aioli the next. A pot pie made with real chicken thighs and hand-cut carrots. Cornbread. Always cornbread. Warm. Wrapped in a red checked cloth napkin. She'd knock on the hull with a wooden spoon. Ellie girl. Dinner. I climb up from the engine room. Grease on my forehead. Sweat in my hair. And she'd already have plates out on the little galley table. Silverware. A cloth napkin folded like a swan. A jelly jar with a wildflower in it that she'd picked on her walk down the pier. I said the first night, "Miss Winnie, please, you do not have to do this." She said, "Honey, I know I don't have to. That's why I'm doing it." And she wouldn't let me pay her. Not once. Not $1. She sat across from me every night, and she watched me eat. Not in a strange way. Not in a hovering way. In the way an old woman watches her daughter eat, when she has been alone in a kitchen for too many years. She hummed sometimes. Hymns. Amazing grace. In the garden. It is well with my soul. Lo, under her breath. Not for me, just for the boat. Like she was singing my father back, into the walls. Cap Thorvald showed up on Saturdays. He didn't say much. He didn't have to. He had spent 62 years in that harbor. He had built and rebuilt every kind of boat that came through the Columbia Bar. And he brought his own tool belt. A red one. Cracked leather. The initials E.T. burned into the strap in cursive, so old it was almost worn away. He showed me how to patch fiberglass. He showed me how to sand rust and prime steel without killing myself with the fumes. He showed me the tricks his father had taught him, and his father's father before him, because the Thorvalds had been in Astoria since 1892 and there wasn't a boat in that harbor that didn't have a little of a Thorvald sweat in her seams. He said one thing to me, that first Saturday, as we sanded the port rail side by side. "Your daddy told me once, said if he ever went, said you'd be the one who came for her." I stopped sanding. He said that. He said it. When? March. This past March. I did the math. 8 months. 8 months before he died. Dad had known something, or he had felt something, or he had just been the kind of man who prepared. I started sanding again. I didn't say anything. Cap didn't say anything either. We sanded until sundown. Silas Redmond showed up on the third Saturday. I did not see him coming. I was on my back under the console in the wheelhouse, trying to trace a wire that had shorted out and killed the running lights. Cursing, sweating, elbow deep in 40 years of somebody else's electrical decisions. A voice from above me said, "Miss Hollings?" I banged my forehead on the underside of the console. I said something my mother would not have approved of. I slid out. There was a 15-year-old boy standing in the wheelhouse. Skinny, baggy sweatshirt with the sleeves too long. Dark hair falling into his eyes. Backpack over one shoulder. Silas Redmond. 9th grade. 4th period. Sits in the back row. Doesn't talk. Doesn't smile. Doesn't do his homework. Has been on the verge of dropping out for 6 weeks, and the counselor keeps calling his grandmother, and his grandmother keeps saying she's sorry, but she can't do anything. He's 15, he does what he wants. Silas Redmond was standing on my father's fishing boat 210 miles from Portland. Silas. Silas. Buddy. How did you get here? He shrugged. That teenage boy shrug. Half apology, half defiance. Bus. You took the bus. Yeah. From Portland. Yeah. To Astoria. Yeah. Silas. Honey. Why? He looked at his shoes. Then he looked out the wheelhouse window at the fog. Then he looked at me. You said in class. Last week. You said your dad had a fishing boat out here. And I don't know. I wanted to see it. I sat down on the captain's chair. Slowly. Does your grandmother know where you are? No. Silas. I texted her. I said I was at a friend's. Silas. I know. You cannot do this. I know. I sighed. I ran my hand through my hair, which was greasy and probably had a spider in it. I looked at that boy. 15. Old baggy sweatshirt. Dark eyes. No father. Mother died of pancreatic cancer 9 months ago. Lives with his grandmother, who is 78 years old, and works 2 shifts at Denny's just to keep the lights on. He was about to drop out of school. He was about to become a statistic. He was about to disappear into the exact hole that swallows quiet boys from broken families every year in this country. And he had ridden a Greyhound bus 3 hours because his geography teacher had mentioned one time in class that her dad had a boat. Silas. Yeah. Are you hungry? He nodded. Slowly. Come on. Miss Winnie fed him a bowl of clam chowder the size of his head. She didn't ask a single question. She just looked at him. And then she looked at me. And then she looked back at him. And she said, "Honey, you eat that whole thing. And there's cornbread coming." Silas ate 2 bowls. Then he ate 4 squares of cornbread. Then he fell asleep at the galley table, with his cheek on his folded arms. Winnie put a blanket over his shoulders. She whispered to me, "Ellie, that child is starving." I know. When was the last time he had a real meal? I don't know, Winnie. I don't know. She wiped her eyes with the corner of her apron. She said, "Well, he'll eat now." I called Silas's grandmother. Her name is Ruth Ann Redmond. She's 78. She has arthritis so bad in her knees that she has to sit down between customers when she waits tables. She cried on the phone when I told her Silas was safe. She said, "I don't know what to do with him anymore, Miss Hollings. I do not know what to do." Mrs. Redmond, Ruth Ann, is it okay if he stays with me tonight? On the boat. My friend Winnie's here. He'll be safe. I'll drive him back to you tomorrow. There was a long pause. Then she said, "Yes. Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you, Miss Hollings." She was so relieved she couldn't even ask why. I hung up the phone. I looked out the porthole at the fog. I thought, "Dear God, what am I doing?" I thought, "Dear God, show me what to do with this boy." The next morning Silas helped me sand the aft deck. He didn't complain. He didn't ask for a break. He worked like he was afraid I was going to send him away if he stopped. Around noon I took him up to the wheelhouse. I sat him down on the captain's chair. I got a length of dock line out of the locker. I said, "You know how to tie a bowline?" "No." "My dad taught me when I was 8. His dad taught him. It's the only knot you really need on a boat. It's called the king of knots." "Why?" "Because it doesn't slip. And because you can always untie it. Even after it's been under load. Even after it's been wet for a year. It never seizes. It always lets you go." I made a small loop in the standing part. I put the working end through. Watch. The rabbit comes out of the hole. Goes around the tree. Goes back down the hole. I pulled it snug. I handed him the line. Try. His hands were rough for a 15-year-old. Cracked knuckles. Fingernails bitten down. He fumbled. He cursed under his breath. He fumbled again. The 4th time. He got it. He held it up. "Miss Hollings, look." His face. God, his face. Nobody had told him he had done something right in a very long time. "That's a bowline, Silas. That's it. That is the king of knots." He turned it over in his hands. Like it was made of gold. He said, so quietly I almost didn't hear him, "Can you show me another one?" I showed him a clove hitch, then a cleat hitch, then a figure-8 stopper. We sat on the wheelhouse floor for 2 hours, just tying knots, in silence, the fog burning off outside, the gulls calling. When I dropped him at his grandmother's that Sunday night, he hugged me. He had never touched me before, not once, not even a handshake. He hugged me like a drowning boy grabs a rope. He said, into my shoulder, "Thank you, Miss Hollings." I said, "Silas, you come back next Saturday. If you want, but you take the bus with money I give you, not money you don't have, and you tell your grandmother where you are. Every time. Deal?" He nodded against my shoulder. Deal. He came back. Every Saturday after that. He brought his math homework. He did it on the galley table while I worked on the engine, and Miss Winnie fed him. I was scrubbing algae off the bulkhead in the galley one night when Winnie asked me a question I did not expect. Ellie, honey, did your daddy ever tell you why your mama picked me, out of all the girls in town, to be her best friend?
No.
You know how we met?
No.
We were 6 years old. First day of first grade. Miss Nelson's class. And I fell down on the playground. Skinned both knees bad. Bloody. Crying. All the other little girls, they laughed at me, because I was the poor kid. My daddy was a mill worker. Torn dress. Everybody knew. She was scrubbing a pot. Slow. Rhythmic. Not looking at me. Your mama, Goldie. She came over. She sat down on the gravel next to me, right in her Sunday dress, and she pulled my head into her lap. And she stroked my hair, and she said, "You're going to be my best friend forever, and I'm going to love you until we're old ladies, and don't you cry about those mean girls, they don't matter." Winnie stopped scrubbing. She looked up at me. She kept every promise she ever made me, every single one, until she was gone. I sat down on the bench. Winnie put the pot down. She dried her hands on her apron. She said, "Ellie, the week before she went, in the hospital, I told you what she said, about not letting you get lost. But there's a part one didn't tell you." "Okay," she said. She said, "Winnie, Ellie is the one who's like Walter. Not like me. She has his heart. She's quiet. She feels everything. She'll be the one who's alone. She'll be the one who doesn't ask for help. And she'll be the one who never knows how much her daddy loved her, because he can't say it, and she can't ask it. Winnie, promise me, if I go first, and if he goes before her, you be there. You tell her what he couldn't say, because Preston and Vivian are like Catherine. They'll take what shines. But Ellie is the one who's like him, and she'll be the one who's left standing on that dock alone." I stopped breathing. "Winnie, that's what she said, honey. She saw all of this. She saw all of it. She was the smartest woman I ever knew." I put my head down on the galley table. I cried in a way I had not cried in a long, long time, because my mother had seen exactly who I was going to become. My mother had made a plan for a moment she would not live to see, and she had chosen this woman. This kind, humming, cornbread-baking woman, with silver hair and a green apron, to be waiting for me when I finally came home. Winnie stroked my hair the way she must have stroked my mother's 72 years ago, on a playground in the rain. She said, "There now, honey. There now. It's all right. It's all right. I've got you now." Vivian did what Vivian does. 10 days into my 3 weeks. Tuesday afternoon. 2:45. My last period. 9th graders. World climate zones. I was writing on the board. The classroom door opened. Vivian walked in. Chanel coat. Sunglasses on her head. 6-inch heels on a linoleum floor. She stood in the doorway. She said, loud, so the whole room could hear, "Ellen, enough is enough. I'm writing you a check for $100,000. Right now. Get in the car. Come home." 28 ninth graders swiveled in their seats. I put down the marker. I said very calmly, "Vivian, you need to leave." "Ellie, this is insane. You are teaching in a school that pays you less than my dog walker. And you're spending your nights on a boat that is going to bankrupt you. Take the money. Get in the car." Silas was in that class. Silas Redmond. 4th period. Back row. Silas stood up. A skinny 15-year-old boy in a baggy sweatshirt. He said, in a voice that broke halfway through the sentence, "You can't talk to Miss Hollings like that." Vivian looked at him for the first time. She smirked. "Sweetheart, sit down."
No.
"Excuse me?" I said no. Amaya stood up. In the 2nd row. 13 years old. Braces. "You can't talk to her like that." Another girl stood up. And another one. And another one. By the time all 28 of them were standing, Vivian was blinking behind her sunglasses. She was not used to being outnumbered by children. The principal appeared in the doorway.
Rito Sandoval.
5'2", 200 pounds. Nobody's fool. 2 decades of teaching in Southeast Portland. Rita took one look at the situation. She said, "Ma'am, you need to come with me." Vivian opened her mouth. Rita said, "Now." Vivian went. She clicked out of my classroom on her 6-inch heels. And I stood at the front of that room, marker in my hand. 34 years old, widowed, grease still under my nails from Sunday night. Amaya said, "Miss Hollings, are you okay?" I said, "I'm okay, sweetheart." I meant it this time. Silas caught my eye from the back row. He nodded. Once. Slow. Like a captain to a captain. I nodded back. That was the day Preston's private investigator started sitting in a black sedan at the end of the pier. Cap saw him first. Called me from the harbor office. "Ellie girl, there's a fella here. Been sitting in his car since dawn. Camera on the dashboard. Pretending to read the paper." Preston. "Yep."
Capítulo.
"Just ignore him. Don't engage. Don't do anything." "You want me to run him off?"
No.
"God, please no. He's within his rights." "Ellie, you know I could just accidentally back the harbormaster's truck into him."
Capítulo. I'm kidding.
Half kidding. I sat there, in my classroom, alone, after the last bell, head in my hands. Because now I knew, now I really knew, Preston was serious. He was watching. He was waiting. And whatever I found on that boat, he was going to try to take it. I had to move faster. The next Saturday morning I was cleaning out the drawers in the wheelhouse cabin. Not because I needed to, just because I couldn't sleep. And it was 3 a.m. And the fog was so thick I couldn't see the pier lights. The bottom drawer was stuck. It had been stuck for 20 years. Dad used to jiggle it just right to open it, and I had never learned the trick. I pried it open with a butter knife. Inside was a photo album. Leather. Water-stained. The word memories stamped in gold letters on the cover. Half worn off. I sat down on the bunk. I opened it on my lap. Pictures I had never seen. My mother, 22 years old, sitting on the deck of the boat, laughing at something off camera. Me, age 3, holding a starfish, grinning gap-toothed at whoever was behind the camera. Dad, younger than I had ever known him, standing on the deck of the Saltwater Legacy in the sun, his arm around another man's shoulder. I stared at the other man. He was tall, silver-haired, wore a navy blazer over a white polo, the kind of man who looked like he owned a yacht, not the kind who fished off a trawler. I turned the photo over. In my father's handwriting, February 14th, 1983, the sea remembers. People forget. W.H. I stared at that sentence for a long time. I took a picture of it with my phone. I sent it to Cap. 3 minutes later my phone rang. "Ellie."
Capítulo.
"Where'd you find that?" "Bottom drawer." "Wheelhouse." "Meet me at the Rusty Nail. 6 o'clock. I'll buy the beer." The Rusty Nail is the oldest bar in Astoria. Dark wood. Sawdust on the floor. A stuffed marlin over the back bar that has been there since 1948. Fishermen only. Nobody bothers you. Nobody asks questions. Cap was in a corner booth. He had 2 beers waiting. He slid one across to me. Foam on top. "Sit down. This is a long one," he said. He wrapped both hands around his glass. He looked at the marlin. Not at me. February 14th, 1983. Valentine's Day. Force 10 storm come up the coast. So fast the buoys didn't have time to warn. The bar was closed to all traffic. Nobody, and I mean nobody, was supposed to be out there. Okay. There was a yacht in trouble. A 112-foot pleasure yacht, called the Ashcroft Belle. Belonged to a man named Cornelius Ashcroft. You ever hear of him?
No.
Real estate money. West Coast big shot. Portland to San Francisco. Died in 2004. Newspapers called him the last of the tycoons. Okay. The Coast Guard wouldn't go out. Weather too bad. Chopper couldn't lift. Nothing. Cap took a long swallow of beer. Your daddy took the saltwater legacy out. Alone. Middle of the night. Middle of that storm. Alone. Alone.
Capítulo.
He heard the mayday on the marine radio. He was the only boat close enough. And he was the only captain in this harbor. Ellie. The only one. Crazy enough. And good enough. To try. I set my beer down. I hadn't drunk any of it. Did he save them? He saved 4 people. Cornelius Ashcroft. His wife. Their son. And their captain. For souls. Off the deck of a sinking yacht in 20-foot seas at 2 o'clock in the morning.
Capítulo.
The yacht went down. Sank in 300 feet of water. Total loss. And Dad brought them back. Brought them back. Cut engine damage. Took him 3 days to limp the legacy into the bar. But he brought them back. I sat there. I stared at my beer. I had never known this. 34 years old. And I had never known this about my own father.
Capítulo.
Why did I never hear about this? Because your daddy never told anybody, honey. He didn't want thanks. He didn't want the papers. He didn't want a medal. But Ashcroft must have. Oh, Ashcroft tried. Ashcroft tried to give him a check for $2 million right there on the dock the day they got in. Your daddy laughed at him. Said, I don't take money for pulling a man out of the water. That's the rule of the sea. You'd have done the same. Cap turned his glass in a slow circle. But Ashcroft was not a man who was used to owing anybody anything. So he came back 3 months later. And he tried again. And your daddy said no again. And Ashcroft came back a 3rd time. This time with something different. Different how? Cap looked at me. Ellie girl. This is the part one don't know. Your daddy took a private meeting with Ashcroft on this boat. In the summer of 1983. I was in the harbor office. I saw Ashcroft walk down the dock with a briefcase. He was on the legacy for 4 hours. He walked off without the briefcase.
Capítulo.
Whatever was in that briefcase, your daddy never spent it. Not 1 dime. He kept living in that little house on Franklin. He kept driving that beat-up truck. He never bought your mother the diamond ring she deserved. He put every dime he ever made into your college fund, and the boat's slip fees and the yearly maintenance on this trawler. He never spent it. Not 1 dime, honey. Cap looked me dead in the eye. He was saving it. For something. Or for someone. I felt very cold in that warm bar. I whispered, for me. Cap nodded once. That would be my guess.
Yeah.
I drove back to the boat in the dark. I did not sleep. I lay in the bunk, fully clothed, boots still on, and I stared at the ceiling. Go down to the place the sea cannot touch. The combination is your birthday, written backwards. I sat up. I climbed down into the engine room. I stood at the far aft bulkhead, the section where the pump had died. The section I had been trying to install the new bilge pump into. The section where a heavy iron floor plate covered what was supposed to be a 3-foot drop into the deepest part of the hull. I got down on my hands and knees. I put my ear to the metal. I tapped it with a wrench. The sound came back wrong. Not the deep rusty ring of a floor plate over a bilge. Flatter sound. A hollow sound. Like there was another surface just below. Not 3 feet down. 8 inches down. I sat back on my heels. My hands started shaking. Go down to the place the sea cannot touch. The bilge. Where water sits. Water touches everything. Except one place. Except a sealed chamber. Above the bilge. Under the floor plate. Hidden by 50 years of grease and rust and grime. I stood up. So fast I hit my head on the overhead pipe. I did not care. Took me 2 hours to pry the floor plate up. The bolts had rusted into their sockets. I broke a wrench. I broke a knuckle. I bled on the plate. The plate came up with a groan. I aimed my flashlight down. Not black water. Not bilge muck. Flat. Gray. Steel. Perfect square. Welded. Sealed. Painted the exact color of the surrounding hull to hide it. For hex bolts. Machined. Precise. Not standard hardware. Custom. and in the center, where you would never expect to find one, set flush into the steel, a combination lock, 6 digits. I stared at it. I sat down, right there, in the grease, and the rust, and the smell of 40 years of dead fish, in my father's overalls, alone. On the boat, my brother's private investigator was watching from the parking lot. I whispered to nobody, "You did it, you crazy old man. You actually did it." I laughed, and then I cried, and then I laughed again. I got a wire brush. I scrubbed the lock face. The dial was corroded but functional. Somebody had oiled it. Recently, within the last year, maybe, my father, God bless him, had been coming down here and maintaining a lock on a hidden compartment on his own boat. For me, I tried his birthday first. March 11th, 1952, 259130. Nothing. The dial spun freely. I tried my mother's death date. July 22nd, 2008, 800272. Nothing. I tried their anniversary. June 8th, 1988, 889180. Nothing. I sat back on my heels. I was tired. I was so tired. I put my head in my hands. I said, out loud, into the dark, "Daddy, come on, help me." And I heard his voice. Not really, but almost. The way you hear a voice in a dream just before you wake up. "My good girl, go down to the place the sea cannot touch. The combination is your birthday." Written backwards. Your birthday. Your birthday. Not his. Not her. Not theirs.
Mine. Ellen Hollings.
Born September 15th, 1992. 09/15/92. Backwards. 295190. I turned the dial. Slowly. Carefully. Hands shaking so bad I had to steady my right wrist with my left hand. Right. To 29. Left. Past 0. To 51. Right. To 90. I pulled the handle. Clicked. Oh God. Oh God. Oh God. Clicked. The seal broke with a soft hiss. Pressurized. Airtight. 40 years of vacuum breaking open in a single sigh. I lifted the plate. The flashlight beam went down into the hidden compartment. Black neoprene lining. Bone dry. Not one drop of water. Not one speck of rust. A single object in the center. A military Pelican case. Model 1650. Olive drab. Dusty. I reached down. I dragged it up onto the engine room floor. It was heavier than I expected. I sat back. I put both hands on the lid. I said, out loud, into the dark, "Okay, Daddy. Okay, I'm here." I opened it, and then I stopped breathing. The first thing I saw was paper. Rows and rows of it, stacked, bound in cellophane sleeves, cream-colored, old, the ink still sharp. I picked up the top sleeve. United States Treasury Bearer Bond. Issued November 1978. Face value, $250,000. Coupon rate, 8.625%. I stared at it. I turned it over. I read it again. $250,000. I looked at the stack. 12 sleeves. Maybe 15. I couldn't count them without moving the whole case. There was another stack under the Treasury bonds. Different color. Blue border. Chase Manhattan Bank. Also bearer bonds. Also from the late 70s. Also stacked. There were 3 velvet pouches next to the bonds. Dark green. Drawstring tops. I picked up the smallest one. I loosened the string. I tipped it into my palm. Diamonds. Rough diamonds. Uncut. 20. Maybe 30 of them. Some the size of a pea. One the size of a marble. They caught the flashlight beam and threw it back at me in 100 directions at once. I dropped the pouch. I sat back on my heels. My heart was going so fast I thought I might pass out. I said, out loud, into the empty engine room, "Oh my God, Daddy, oh my God." And then I saw the book, at the bottom of the case, under the bonds, under the pouches, a leather journal, dark brown, corners worn soft, a leather strap tied around it. Dad's handwriting on the front. Just 2 words. For Ellie. I picked it up. My hands were shaking, so badly I could barely undo the strap. I opened to the first page. If you're reading this, I'm gone. And you did what I hoped you would do. You didn't sell. You didn't take the check. You came out here. You went down into the dark. And you found me, my good girl. I always knew it would be you. I put the journal down on my lap. I put both hands over my face. I sat in the engine room of my father's boat, in the middle of the night, in November, in the fog, and I sobbed, until my ribs hurt. Not the polite tears from the funeral. Not the quiet leak from the graveside. The other kind. The kind where you can't breathe. Where you make a sound you didn't know your body could make. He had known who I was, and he had loved me more than his other 2 children combined. He had built me a treasure, and he had trusted me. He had trusted me to find it, to use it, to be worthy of it. I read the whole journal that night, right there, on the engine room floor, under the single flashlight beam, cover to cover. He wrote about the storm. February 14th, 1983. The wind speeds, the wave heights, the exact moment he decided to take the boat out. He wrote about pulling Cornelius Ashcroft off the deck of the Ashcroft Belle. Ashcroft was 58 years old. Silver-haired, weighed 160 pounds, and clung to Dad's shoulders like a child for the whole 3-day trip back. He wrote about the summer meeting on the boat. Ashcroft with the briefcase. Ashcroft saying, "Walter, I owe you my family's lives. I don't take a debt like that lightly. You will not take money. Fine, take this instead. These bonds. I've been holding them since the 70s. Bearer bonds. Untraceable. Legal. Yours. Do whatever you want with them. Give them away. Burn them. Bury them. I don't care. But my ledger is closed with you." Dad wrote, "I never touched them, because I didn't need them. Your mother and I had what we needed, but I put them here. In this compartment, which I built myself over one winter, because I figured, someday, one of my children might need something big. Something bigger than the seafood company. Bigger than the real estate. Something I couldn't have imagined yet." He wrote about Preston. Preston is Catherine's boy. He was 10 when she left. He never forgave any of us for it. Not me for staying. Not her for going. Not himself for surviving it. He built a wall so tall he can't see over it anymore. He measures everything in dollars because he can count dollars. He can't count love. He was never taught. He is not a bad man. He is a wounded man. And wounded men, Ellie, wounded men often become cruel before they become whole. He wrote about Vivian. Vivian was 7 when her mother left. And she has spent her whole life trying to become the kind of woman her mother would come back for. She wears Chanel because her mother did. She lives in Boston because her mother went to Boston. She married a rich man because that's what her mother did before she left me. She is not chasing money, Ellie. She is chasing a ghost. She will never catch her. I could not fix this. I tried. Catherine could not be fixed. And by the time I met your mother, and by the time you came, Preston was 12 and Vivian was 8, and it was already too late. I could give them everything. And I did. And it will never be enough. Because the thing they want, I cannot leave them in a will. He wrote about my mother. Your mother saved my life. Ellie, do not let anyone ever tell you otherwise. I was a widower in every way, but the paperwork. I was raising 2 angry children. I was drinking too much. And she walked into that seafood market one Tuesday morning in 1988 to buy salmon for her father's birthday dinner. And she looked at me across the counter. And she saw, right through the ice display, right into me. And she said, "You look like you could use a friend, Mr. Hollings." I said, "I could use 2. And she laughed the laugh I fell in love with. Right there, in the market. And that was that. He wrote about me. You were born in the middle of a rainstorm on September 15th, 1992. 2 weeks early. Your mother's water broke in the kitchen. I drove her to the hospital in the truck with the busted heater, and she sang the whole way. She was terrified. Singing is what she did when she was terrified. You came out red and screaming and 8 pounds 3 ounces, and I held you for the first time and I thought, God Almighty, I have been given a third chance. I have been given a do-over. I did not deserve this and I will not waste it. And then your mother got sick when you were 16, and I lost her. And I was not a good father to you after that, Ellie. I was so lost in my own grief I could not see yours. I let you leave for college. I let you leave for Portland. I let you get married. I let you lose Daniel. And I never said the thing I should have said. So I am saying it now. I love you, Ellie Hollings. I have loved you since the moment you came out red and screaming. I have loved you every single day since. I love you today. I will love you tomorrow. And whatever is on the other side of tomorrow, I will love you there too. You are the best thing your mother and I ever did. This treasure is yours. Use it kindly. That is all I ask. Your father, Walter Hollings. Written this 11th day of March, 2025. Aboard the Saltwater Legacy. Alone. Missing you. 2 months before he died. He had written it 2 months before he died. I sat in the engine room, and I held that journal against my chest. And I said, out loud, into the dark, I love you too, Daddy. I love you too. I love you too. Over and over, until the flashlight batteries died. Until the first gray light of morning came through the porthole. Until I could see my own hand in front of my face. The phone was ringing. I hadn't heard it. I don't know how long it had been ringing. I climbed up out of the engine room. My knees were stiff. My face was salt-crusted and swollen. I looked at the screen. Preston. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again immediately. I let it go again. The third time I picked up. Ellie. His voice was ice. Yes. My investigator sent me photos. You had a marine welder from Portland on that boat 2 days ago. Specialized. Custom work. Not standard repair. What are you doing? Preston. It's 5 in the morning. What are you doing, Ellie? I'm restoring the boat. You're lying. I'm not lying. You found something. Preston. You found something and you didn't tell us. Which is a crime. Which is estate fraud. Which is federal. Preston. I'll be there Monday morning. I'm flying into Portland tonight. Vivian is driving up from Boston. And I am not coming alone. Do you understand me? I am bringing my attorneys. Silence. He said, do you understand me, Ellen? I said, yes. I hung up. I sat on the deck of the boat as the sun came up over the Columbia. The fog was burning off in long white sheets. The gulls were starting to call. Somewhere down the pier a diesel engine coughed to life. I called Judge Whitaker. He picked up on the second ring.
Ellen.
Judge Edmund. I need help. Talk to me, sweetheart. I told him. Everything. The compartment. The bonds. The diamonds. The journal. Preston's investigator. Preston's phone call. Preston coming Monday with lawyers. Judge Whitaker was silent for a long time. Then he said very quietly, Ellen, your father prepared for this day for 20 years. Judge, 20 years, honey. What do I do? You do nothing. You go to sleep. You eat breakfast. You go to your job Monday morning. And Monday afternoon, when Preston and Vivian arrive at the boatyard, you call me, and I will be there in 90 minutes. Judge.
Ellen.
Listen to me. Your father was not a man who left things to chance. He built a fortress around this. He built a legal fortress. And he built it long before either of your siblings knew there was anything to protect. Do you understand me? I think so. You will. Monday. I promise you. Monday you will understand exactly what kind of a man your father was. I closed my eyes. I nodded even though he couldn't see me. Thank you, Judge. Get some sleep, sweetheart. I did not sleep, but I did something better. I went to see Miss Winnie. She was already at the shop. 6 in the morning. Flour on her hands. Cornbread in the oven. She took one look at my face. She wiped her hands on her apron. She said, "Sit down, honey. I'll pour." She poured me a cup of coffee. She set it in front of me. She sat across from me. I said, "Winnie, I need you to hear something. And then I need you to promise me you'll never tell a soul. Until I say you can. Ellie, promise me. I promise." I told her. I told her all of it. She did not react the way I expected. She did not gasp. She did not cry. She did not clutch her apron. She just sat there, very still, both hands wrapped around her own coffee cup. When I finished, she said, "Your daddy told me, 2 years ago, on his birthday, right here in this booth. He said, 'Winnie, if I go before Ellie figures it out, you help her. She's gonna need a friend when it happens.'"
Daher.
He told you. He told me. Not the details. Not the amount. Not where. But he told me there was something. He said, "It's the last piece of me. And she's the only one who's going to know what to do with it." I laughed. A wet, choked laugh. I said, "This whole town has been in on it. Hasn't it?" "Not the whole town, honey." She reached across the table. She took my hand. "Just the people who loved him." I called Cap next. I met him at the Rusty Nail. 9 in the morning. The place was empty except for the bartender wiping down bottles. Cap didn't drink coffee. He drank hot water with lemon. He said it kept his pipes clean. I told him. Just the outline. The bonds. The diamonds. The journal. He nodded. Once. Then he said something I did not expect. "Ellie girl, I want you to walk into that showdown Monday. And I want you to remember something." "What?" "You're not doing this for you. You're doing this for your daddy. And your mama. And every kid who's ever gotten stepped on by a rich man, who felt entitled to what wasn't his." I looked at him. He looked at me. He said, "Your daddy was the last honest man on this dock. You're the last honest woman. Don't let them make you feel small on Monday. You hear me?" "I hear you." "Good." He stood up. He put a calloused hand on my shoulder for a second. Just a second. Then he left. I did one more thing that morning. I drove to Columbia Coast Bank. Downtown Astoria. The old brick building on Commercial Street. I brought one small bond. One. A treasury bond. 50,000 face. Written in 1979. I asked to see the branch manager. Her name was Margaret Lindqvist. 50-something. Gray hair pulled back in a neat clip. Reading glasses on a chain. She took the bond. She turned it over in her hands. She frowned slightly. She said, "Give me 20 minutes. She disappeared into a back office. She came back 28 minutes later. Her face was different. "Miss Hollings." "Yes. This is authentic. I verified it with the Federal Reserve. The bond is fully redeemable. Face value plus all accrued coupon interest reinvested at prevailing treasury rates. Over 46 years. With inflation adjustments and compounding on the redeemed coupons. Comes to just over $1.1 million.
Daher.
1.1 million. Yes, ma'am. For that one piece of paper. For that one piece of paper." I sat down in the visitor chair. Slowly. She said very gently, "Miss Hollings, I do not know what your situation is, but I would strongly recommend that you not walk any more of these into any bank without an attorney. And a plan. And a very good tax advisor." "I have an attorney." "Judge Whitaker?" "Yes." She smiled for the first time. A small, real smile. "Then you're in the best hands in Oregon." That night I made 2 phone calls. I called Ruth Ann Redmond, Silas's grandmother. I said, "Ruth Ann, I know it's late. I need to ask you something. Would you and Silas be willing to have dinner with me next Sunday? My house in Portland. I have something I'd like to talk to you both about." She said, "Yes, ma'am." She said it before I could even finish. I called Winnie. I said, "Miss Winnie, I need to set up a trust. A real one. For you and Cap. Judge Whitaker is going to handle it. I want to put $200,000 in Cap's name, so his wife can afford dialysis, without worrying every month. And I want to put 150,000 in yours so you can fix the roof of your shop and pay off your mortgage." Winnie did not speak for a long time. She said very quietly, "Ellie, honey, that is too much. Miss Winnie, that is too much. My mother left me in your care. That's what she did. Whether you knew it or not, that's what she did. And you kept the promise for 19 years, without ever meeting me. And when I walked through your door, you fed me every night. And you told me my mother's stories, and you hummed hymns while I ate. Ellie, it is not too much." She was crying. I could hear her breathing. She said, "Your mama would be so proud of you." I said, "I hope so." Sunday night I went home to Portland. My little bungalow, the one Daniel and I bought. The one I had been paying off alone. I stood in my own kitchen. For the first time in 3 weeks. The plants were dead. The mail was piled up. The refrigerator had gone off. I did not care. I sat on the couch, in the dark, and I waited for Monday afternoon. Astoria Marine Works, the premier dry dock on the north coast. Big shed with fluorescent lights, and the smell of primer and welding smoke. The saltwater Legacy had been hauled out of the water on Saturday. She was sitting in the cradle. 12 professionals in coveralls moved around her like a pit crew, sanding, priming, prepping her for a full hull refinish. She looked like herself again. Under all the rust and rot, she had been beautiful all along. I was standing near the bow, talking to the foreman, a stocky man with a red beard named Halvor Pornson, 4th-generation Astorian. Knew my father since he was a kid. The bay doors slammed open. Preston walked in first. Charcoal suit, cashmere overcoat. 2 attorneys behind him in identical navy blazers, carrying identical briefcases. Vivian was 2 steps behind. And behind Vivian was Whitfield Ashford, her husband. I had only met him twice. My wedding and Dad's funeral. He had spent both events on his phone. He looked like every rich man in a Boston boardroom. Tall, thin, silver-haired at 45. Expensive glasses. He looked terrible today. Pale, unshaven, wearing a wrinkled coat. I noticed him, but I did not have time to think about him. Because Preston was already yelling, "Halvor, stop all work on this vessel. Immediately. Now, this is a probate matter. Everything you're doing is being paid for with disputed funds." Halvor looked at me. I nodded. Halvor gave the signal. The sanders went quiet. The silence in the shed was enormous. Vivian stepped forward. She was pointing at me, actually pointing, like I was a suspect in a courtroom drama. "She stole from us. She stole from our father's estate. She found something on that boat and she has been hiding it from us for weeks." One of the attorneys stepped forward, cleared his throat. "Miss Hollings, we are filing an emergency injunction against you as of 9 a.m. this morning. Any assets discovered aboard this vessel are, per Oregon estate law, subject to equal division among the beneficiaries of the Hollings estate. Your failure to disclose constitutes. May I make one phone call?" Everyone stopped. The attorney blinked at me. "Excuse me? May make one phone call before you start reading the injunction." "Just one." Preston sneered. "By all means, call your teacher friend. Call the pastor. Call whoever. It won't change." I dialed. Judge Whitaker picked up on the first ring. "Ellen." "I'm ready." "Hold the phone up. I'm in the parking lot." I held the phone up. 15 seconds later, the bay door opened again. Judge Edmund Whitaker walked in. Cream leather folder under his arm. Half-moon glasses on the tip of his nose. Same suit he had worn at my father's funeral. He looked, honestly, like he had walked out of a 1962 courtroom drama. Preston's face changed. He had not expected this. Vivian's face changed. She had not expected this either. The 2 attorneys straightened up. Because in the state of Oregon, even now, 12 years after his retirement, when Edmund Whitaker walks into a room, other lawyers stand a little straighter. Judge Whittaker did not raise his voice. He never raised his voice. He never had to. He said, "Good morning." Nobody answered. He opened his folder. "For the record, I am Edmund Whittaker. I served as personal attorney to Walter James Hollings from 1985 until his death. I drafted his will. I administered his estate, and I am here today as counsel to his daughter Ellen." The younger attorney tried to interrupt. "Judge, with respect, you'll let me finish, son, and then you'll have your turn." The younger attorney shut up. Judge Whittaker turned a page. On March 3, 1974, Walter Hollings purchased the vessel currently known as the Saltwater Legacy from a marine broker in Newport, Oregon. However, he did not register this purchase in his personal name. He looked up, right at Preston. He registered it under a Delaware limited liability company, which he had formed 60 days earlier, for the sole and specific purpose of holding this asset. Preston frowned. "What?" "The company is called Legacy Marine LLC. It was formed on January 2, 1974. It has one asset. One. The vessel. And any and all contents therein." Vivian said, "What does that have to do with anything?" Judge Whittaker turned another page, very slowly. "Under the terms of Walter Hollings' last will and testament, which was signed and notarized in my presence on August 14, 2018, the vessel Saltwater Legacy was bequeathed to Ellen Marigold Hollings. But because the vessel is legally an asset of Legacy Marine LLC, what Ellen actually inherited was the LLC itself, in its entirety, all shares, all holdings, all present and future contents." Preston said, "So what? That doesn't matter." Judge Whittaker looked up over his glasses. "It matters, Preston. It matters a great deal. Because 3 weeks ago, in my office, when you and Vivian offered Ellen $200,000 to decline the vessel, you both signed a legal waiver renouncing any and all future claim to Legacy Marine LLC. As part of the estate settlement offer." Preston went very still. Vivian's mouth opened, and closed, and opened again. Judge Whittaker held up 2 pieces of paper. "Your signatures, notarized, witnessed by my paralegal, in front of you both." He set the papers on top of the folder. He said in the same quiet voice, "You waived your rights to the LLC. You waived your rights to every asset it contains, present and future."
Vivian whispered, "No."
Judge Whittaker said, "Yes." Preston lunged forward. His face was red. "This is a technicality. This is a scam. This is Ellen. You planned this. You knew. Preston, you knew what was on that boat. You waited. You conned us into signing. Preston, you conned us. Judge, she conned us. She has been sitting on a fortune this whole time, and she waited for us to sign it away. Preston." The judge's voice went cold. Just for a second. Just cold enough to freeze the shed. "Your father drafted that waiver in 2018. 7 years ago. He knew that, if he died and he left Ellen the boat, you and Vivian would do exactly what you did. And he built a legal instrument to protect her from you. 7 years before this moment." Preston stared. The judge said, "He knew you, son. He knew you both. And he built a wall around his youngest daughter that neither of you could climb." There was a long silence in the shed. The kind of silence that has a shape. Preston made a sound. Somewhere between a laugh and a sob. Neither one really. Vivian sat down. On a wooden crate. Just sat down. In her Chanel coat. On sawdust. She said, very quietly, "How much?" I looked at her. She said, "How much, Ellen?" I looked at Judge Whittaker. He nodded once. "Small." I said, "About $23 million. In bonds. And rough diamonds." Vivian put her head in her hands. She did not cry. She just sat there, head down, hands pressed into her forehead. Preston turned to me. His face was working. Why did he do this? To me. I looked at him. For a very long moment, I did not know what to say. Then I said, Preston, when was the last time you called Dad? Just to say hi. He stared at me. When was the last time you called Dad? And it wasn't about a business deal, or the will, or a favor, just to see how he was doing. He opened his mouth. He closed it. He didn't remember. I said, that's why. I turned to Vivian. Vivian, when was the last time you asked Dad what his favorite meal was? Or what book he was reading? Or whether he was lonely? She did not lift her head. She whispered, I don't know. I said, that's why. I took a breath. I said, he didn't punish you. He gave you what you wanted. You wanted money. He gave you money. You wanted status. He gave you status. I wanted him. He gave me him. Vivian made a sound, deep in her chest, like something breaking loose. That was when Whitfield Ashford stepped forward. I had almost forgotten he was there. He had been standing back by the door the whole time. He walked past Preston, past the attorneys. He walked right up to Vivian. He crouched down in front of her. He took her hands out of her face. He said, in a voice so quiet the whole shed had to lean in, Viv, look at me. She looked up. He said, I didn't come here to help you take her money. She blinked. What? I came here because I have to tell you something, and I couldn't do it in Boston, and I couldn't do it on the plane, but I have to do it here, now, in front of these people, because it's the only place I have the courage. She was staring at him. He said, my firm is bankrupt, Viv. It's been bankrupt for 6 months. I've been hiding it. I've been moving money to cover the payroll. Everything. Our house. The Nantucket place. Both of them are collateralized. On loans I can't repay. In 60 days we will be foreclosed on. Vivian said, Whit, I was going to let you help Preston take her money, because I thought if you had it, if we had it, maybe I could fix this without you ever having to know. Whit, but I watched what you did to your sister just now, and what you were about to do, and I couldn't, because whatever kind of man I am not that kind of man. And whatever kind of woman you are becoming, Vivian, it is not the woman I married. Vivian was crying now, real crying, ugly crying, mascara down her cheeks. Whitfield was crying too. He said, I love you, and I'm sorry, and I don't know what happens next. She grabbed his coat with both hands, fistfuls of it. She said, why didn't you tell me? He said, because I thought you'd leave. She said, I would never have left. They held each other, right there, on a sawdust floor, in a boatyard, in front of me and Preston and Judge Whitaker, and 2 very uncomfortable attorneys. I looked at them. For the first time in my life, I saw my sister, not the Chanel, not the sunglasses, not the champagne, just a scared woman, whose husband had been drowning quietly for 6 months, while she was fighting me for a boat. Preston left first. He didn't say goodbye. He gathered his attorneys with a jerk of his chin. He walked out. At the bay door he stopped. He did not turn around. He said, Ellie. Yes. I need to go. Okay. I don't know how to do this. I said, take your time, Preston. He nodded, his back to me. Then he walked out, into the parking lot, and I heard the Escalade start, and I heard him pull away. Vivian and Whitfield stayed the night in Astoria. They got a room at the Cannery Pier Hotel, overlooking the river. The next morning Vivian came alone to the boat. She was wearing jeans, and a sweater, and no makeup. I had never seen my sister in jeans. She sat down on the deck. She looked at me. She said, can we talk? I said, yes. She said, I don't know how to start. I said, I do. I sat down across from her. I said, you were 5 when your mother left, and Dad tried, but he didn't know how to raise girls. And I know that. I've read what he wrote about you. He wanted to do better. He didn't know how. She started crying again. I said, it's not your fault, Viv, that you got hurt. It's not your fault that you spent your whole life chasing a woman who was never coming back. She said, I hated your mother, Ellie. I nodded. She said, I hated her, because Dad looked at her the way he was supposed to look at my mother, and she was kind to me and I hated her for that too. Because kindness from her felt like pity. I said, she wasn't pitying you, Viv. She loved you. She used to tell Winnie about you. She said, that girl has such big shoulders for a little girl. Someone needs to teach her she can put them down. Vivian made a sound. She said that. I said, she said that. She put her face in her hands. She said, I'm so tired, Ellie. I'm so tired. I said, I know. I didn't say I forgave her. Not yet. Because I hadn't. Not all the way. Forgiveness takes longer than a morning. But I sat with her. I sat with my sister on the deck of my father's boat. And I let her cry until the sun burned through the fog. Preston called me on Sunday. 5 o'clock. Just like Dad used to. He said, Ellie. I said, Preston. He said, I wanted to see if you were okay. I said, I am. Are you? He said, no, but I'm working on it. There was a long pause. He said, I called a therapist. On Wednesday. She sees me on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I said, Preston, that's good. That's really good. He said, yeah. Another pause. He said, Ellie. Yes. He said, do you have anything of Dad's that I could have? I don't have anything of him. I closed my eyes. I said, yes.
Ido.
I called Judge Whitaker after we hung up. I said, Judge, there's a pocket watch. Dad's. Silver. Engraved. He kept it in the top drawer of his dresser. Can you send it to Preston? For me. The judge said, Ellen, that watch was Preston's grandfather's. Your father's father's. He engraved it for Preston on the day he was born. He never gave it to him. I said, send it to him, Judge. The judge said, you are your mother's daughter, sweetheart. He sent it that week. Preston called me the following Sunday at 5 o'clock, and he could not speak. He just cried into the phone for a long time. And I sat in my kitchen in Portland. And I let him. That was the first Sunday call. Of many. Spring came late to Astoria that year. Cherry blossoms didn't open on Franklin Avenue until the second week of April. The Columbia ran high with snowmelt from the Cascades. The seals were back on the pilings, barking at the tourists. The Walter and Marigold Hollings Foundation had its first board meeting on a Saturday afternoon in April. We met in the back room of the Weathered Anchor. Winnie was the executive director. She had turned in her apron, sort of. She still made the cornbread for the meetings. Cap Thorvald was on the board. So was Halvor Pornson. So was Judge Whitaker. So was I. Silas Redmond was our first scholarship recipient. Full ride to Oregon State University. Marine biology. He was going to be the first person in his family to go to college. His grandmother Ruth Ann came to the announcement ceremony. She sat in the front row of St. Mary's by the Sea, and she cried through the whole thing. And she kept whispering to me, thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. I told her, Ruth Ann, please, call me Ellie. And you don't have to thank me. Silas is the one who did the work. She grabbed my hand. She said, I know what you did, Ellie. I know. Vivian and Whitfield moved to Astoria in March. They sold the Boston place at a loss. They rented a little 3-bedroom bungalow on Grand Avenue, 2 blocks from where our mother grew up, 2 blocks from where Miss Winnie had grown up. Whitfield got a job doing forensic accounting for a small firm in Portland. He drove in 3 days a week. He was thinner, quieter, happier. Vivian became the foundation's operations manager. She was extraordinary at it. Turns out, chasing money and running a nonprofit used exactly the same muscles. She just aimed them somewhere new. She called me one Tuesday morning from her office in the back of Winnie's shop. She said, Ellie. I said, yes. She said, I have to tell you something. I said, okay. She said, I'm happy. I don't know how, but I am. I said, I know, Viv. She said, how did you know? I said, because I can hear it in your voice. Preston never moved home. Manhattan was his home. That was okay. But he came out for Easter, and for Dad's birthday in June, and for Thanksgiving, and for Christmas. He was softer every time. Not fixed. Nobody gets fixed. But softening. The way stone softens in water. If you give it enough water. And enough time. He came to the foundation gala in November. In a plain dark suit.
No cufflinks.
He gave a speech about our father that made half the room cry. He talked about the pocket watch. He talked about the summer he was 10, and Dad taught him to skip stones on the Columbia. He talked about how he hadn't understood. Then, that his father was trying. That his father was doing his best. That his father had loved him in the ways he knew how. He said, from the podium, my father gave my sister Ellen a boat, and I laughed at her, because I thought I knew what value was. I did not know what value was. My sister did. My father did. I am the one who had to learn. He came down from the stage. He walked over to my table. He kissed the top of my head. He said, hi, Ellie. I said, hi, Preston. The Saltwater legacy was finished in June. Restored. Not modernized. Every original fitting. Every original brass. The bell above the wheelhouse. The wooden helm. The framed photograph of my mother in the cabin. The same. Exactly the same. Except now she was seaworthy. Except now she was mine. The launch was on a Sunday morning. Sunrise. First light of a clear June day. Miss Winnie stood on the pier in her Sunday dress. Cap Thorvald stood next to her. In a wool cap. Silver beard. Salute ready. Silas Redmond stood next to Cap, 18 years old now. Taller. Broader. A month away from freshman orientation at Oregon State. Wearing a Beavers sweatshirt his grandmother had bought him at Fred Meyer. Vivian and Whitfield stood behind them. Vivian had a scarf on, her hair blowing in the wind. Preston was there. He had flown in Friday night. Judge Whitaker was there. Kane, same suit. Ruthen Redmond was there. On Silas's arm. I stood on the deck of the boat. I was wearing my father's old wool cap. Judge Whitaker had handed me a small wrapped package the night before. I opened it that morning. In the cabin. Alone. Inside was a brass compass. Scratched. Well used. My father's compass. The one he had carried in his pocket for 40 years. Every time he went out. On the back it was engraved. Big water. Find your way home. I love you always, Dad. I put the compass on the console. I put my hands on the wheel. I looked at the people on the pier. I nodded. Cap gave the signal. I turned the key. The engine caught on the first try. The bell above the wheelhouse rang twice, all on its own, from the vibration. I eased her out of the slip. The gulls rose in a white cloud. Somewhere on the hill above town, the bell at St. Mary's by the sea began to ring, because it was Sunday morning, and it always rang at 7:30 on Sunday morning. Behind me my sister waved. My brother waved. My old friend waved. My young student waved. And an old man with a silver beard stood at attention on a wooden pier and saluted, the way a captain salutes a captain leaving the harbor for the very first time. I turned the wheel. I pointed her west, out past the jetty, out into the open Pacific, where my father used to take me on Saturday mornings, when I was small, where I could still hear him, in the wind, in the bell, in the water, saying my name, saying, my good girl, saying, you came for me. I knew you would. The fog opened up ahead of me. The sun came through, and I steered the Saltwater legacy out, into the great blue that never forgets, that never lets us go, that always, always brings us home. The end.